public is trained to fear the hypersonic missile launch, the satellite feed showing the ICBM silo doors. This is a deliberate misdirection. The primary vector of systemic attack is not a kinetic event. It is absolute, weaponized silence. While legacy media tracks an RC-135 spy plane over the Caribbean, the strategic objective is not to destroy the aircraft. It is to sever the optic nerve connecting the global financial system to the kinetic arsenal it funds. Analysts at CSIS confirm that the 400 undersea cables carrying 97% of global data represent a catastrophic single point of failure. This protocol creates a blind Leviathan, a state possessing the world's most expensive military hardware, but with no ability to command, control, or fund it. Financial transactions halt. GPS signals are blinded. A launch-on-warning system becomes a launch-on-rumor liability. This is not war. It is systemic decapitation. As detailed in reports from NATO's own command structures, this is the core doctrine of cognitive warfare. An adversary doesn't need to match a carrier group's kinetic cost. They only need to make it an unsustainable fiscal liability. By inducing data blindness, they trigger a solvency crisis long before a kinetic crisis, creating the perfect conditions for internal collapse. The motive is not ideology. It is a solvency crisis. When a nation's internal liabilities become unmanageable, war is no longer a choice. It is a financial mechanism. Analysts at CSIS confirm this protocol in the context of Russia, where domestic liabilities and an unpopular war compound pre-existing economic fragility. A state facing this level of internal decay cannot sustain the fiscal burden of symmetric conflict. The operational cost of projecting kinetic power, such as deploying RC-135 spy planes, becomes an existential liability. This weakness forces a pivot. The strategy shifts from conventional parity to asymmetric escalation. The objective is to use low-cost vectors, specifically cognitive warfare, as detailed in NATO's own INSS analysis, to attack the adversary's core vulnerabilities. By accelerating the target's own solvency issues, such as a housing crisis or the collapse of multilateral trade via the WTO, the aggressor exports its internal failure. The goal is to make the target's expensive military arsenal fiscally impossible to maintain, forcing a strategic paralysis. It is a launch-on-warning protocol for economic collapse. The central economic equation of modern conflict is no longer symmetric. According to analysis from institutions like RUSI, the cost imbalance is the primary vector of attack. A $5 million main battle tank, the product of a nation-state's industrial base, can now be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a balanced exchange. It is a 10,000 to 1 negative return on investment for the legacy power. Every deployment of an expensive kinetic asset becomes a roll of the dice against a mathematically guaranteed fiscal loss. This radical cost imbalance enables what strategists call the democratization of violence. Access to highly lethal, standoff capabilities is no longer the exclusive domain of state-level actors with massive defense budgets. It has been commoditized. This protocol allows an adversary to bypass expensive force-on-force confrontation and instead impose disproportionate costs, bleeding a state's treasury one asset at a time. The goal isn't to win a pitched battle, it's to accelerate a solvency crisis. Therefore, the deployment of a multi-million-dollar asset like an RC-135 spy plane becomes a strategic liability, not a strength. While it gathers intelligence, its operational cost represents a predictable drain on a declining economic base already fractured by systemic liabilities like the housing crisis and the collapse of WTO trade structures. The adversary's blueprint is simple. use low-cost kinetic threats to make high-cost power projection fiscally unsustainable, forcing a launch-on-warning dilemma before the entire arsenal becomes an unaffordable relic. The primary theater of operations is not a recognized battlefield. It is the financial and social infrastructure of nations designated as proxy laboratories. These are not failing states. They are stable, Western-aligned countries selected as stress test environments to refine a specific protocol, asymmetric escalation. The blueprint is documented. NATO's own chief scientist detailed the vector in a Sentinel report on cognitive warfare. This is not speculation. It is doctrine. These gray zones, experiencing sudden, inexplicable regional instability, are where the doctrine is weaponized. They are used to calibrate attacks against a target's core systemic liabilities. Analysts at RUSI confirm these labs are used to measure the precise economic accelerants needed to trigger a solvency crisis. The objective is to find the breaking point, to see how a manufactured housing crisis or the systemic shock of a WTO collapse can be amplified to make a nation's kinetic power projection a mathematical liability. Therefore, the deployment of a high-cost asset like an RC-135 spy plane becomes the desired outcome for the adversary. It forces the target to burn fiscal liquidity on kinetic power while its economic foundations are being systematically dissolved from within. The instability in the proxy lab is merely the symptom. The attack is on the balance sheet. The solvency crisis is the kill chain. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy of choice. It is a mathematical protocol of deterrence. The protocol dictates that a nation launches its nuclear arsenal upon receiving credible warning of an incoming strike. Its function depends entirely on the integrity of its sensory apparatus, the global network of radar and satellite systems. The system is designed to prevent a successful first strike from disarming the target. This dependency is the systemic vulnerability. An adversary employing an asymmetric escalation protocol does not target the missiles, they target the data. Analysts at RUSI confirm that a sophisticated cyber attack can blind command and control systems, creating what is now termed the fog of digital war. When the screens go dark, the commander is confronted with a binary decision matrix under extreme temporal pressure. Is the blindness a technical glitch, or is it the 5-minute prelude to impact? To wait for confirmation is to risk the total liquidation of the kinetic arsenal in its silos. To launch is to initiate global conflict based on an absence of information. The fear of being disarmed becomes the trigger. This is the use it or lose it paradox, engineered by a low-cost cyber vector to make a trillion-dollar kinetic deterrent a catastrophic liability. The next phase of conflict is not declared, it is calibrated. Adversaries understand the dominant systemic risk is not symmetric military confrontation, but economic failure. They will execute a calibration shot, a limited, high-impact event designed purely for data collection, to test a nation's systemic fragility and measure its political response time. This protocol, what NATO documents refer to as cognitive warfare, bypasses expensive kinetic assets. While the U.S. Air Force deploys an RC-135 spy plane at an immense fiscal cost, the adversary's true vector is non-kinetic. It targets the nation's core systemic liability, its declining economic solvency, accelerated by the housing crisis and the collapse of WTO multilateralism. The strategy makes kinetic power projection a mathematically unsustainable liability. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, a Tier 1 U.S. container port will experience a 72-hour logistics paralysis. Its terminal operating system, the digital brain managing all crane, truck, and ship movements, will suffer a cascading failure. it will be publicly attributed to a complex systems integration error or a phantom ransomware group, making it attribution impossible. This is not an act of war. It is a solvency test. The event will provide the adversary with a precise calculation of economic damage per hour and a baseline for the political paralysis that follows. It is a non-kinetic probe to determine if the internal decay is terminal, creating the conditions for a use it or lose it paradox with legacy kinetic weapons. The shot is fired to see if the system is already on life support.